My name is Nance. I am 23 years old. I'm a public policy, master's candidate, and I am a part of this Freedom School movement. Can you guys hear me? Yeah? This is good? Okay, a little bit closer. All right, so in about a month, there we go. In about a month, I will be heading down to Knoxville, Tennessee to partake in the third consecutive training with the with the Children's Defense Fund Freedom School program. As Mr. Turner just mentioned, I have served as a servant leader intern in Harlem, New York, and also as a site coordinator in Hartford. I am serving as a site coordinator in Brooklyn this upcoming summer in Fort Greene. What the CDF Freedom School program is, it's focused on families and youth specifically to make a difference. And although the Children's Defense Fund has numerous programs and initiatives that they run throughout the year, this one is the only one that truly has that sole focus. And now, what is Freedom School? You might be wondering, exactly what this program looks like. We'll be kind of delving more so into that. But what this program really does is that it inspires a love of reading. It encourages students to kind of get outside of their comfort zone. And it also teaches or allows for these scholars and these youth to realize that they can make a difference in themselves and also in the community around them. So also a little bit of background with the CDF Freedom School program. It's rooted strongly in tradition, specifically the civil rights movement, and specifically certain events that occurred during the civil rights movement. One of these events was the Children's March, which occurred in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. And in a second, we'll have a short clip from this film. And this film is something that is actually shown at every single national training that occurs, again, with the Freedom School program. So although I'll be seeing this in its entirety in, again, a few weeks, this event, again, the Children's March, is one that kind of sparked specifically the Freedom School movement.
Got more excited.
And I had a cool call, They said, okay, we need you to go out to Fairfield. There's some students outside the classroom that won't go back in. Lo and behold, when I got it.
Let's keep going. Let's try it again.
Should I click it?
You just talk about it.
Well, what this film shows, if we're able to get it going, it actually shows that it was youth that were
Fairfield.
Inspired.
The whole
there we
campus
go.
was outside of the building, and they all said, "We going to Birmingham."
20 kids collide, bro. Behind it.
The more we walked, the more we gathered, and every once in a while you look back and you saw it was more kids coming from somewhere, from another direction. You said, where are all these kids coming from?
You had never seen that many people in your life. It's like a football game.
Kids walked as far as 18 miles to get to Birmingham in order to be arrested.
And the purpose was to go to jail.
The guy.
So you just saw some of the information, some information about this march, Children's March of 1963. And Freedom Schools represent a movement, a multi-generational program. As you heard, Brian is my son, and I'm honored to be on the stage with him tonight. We represent, first of all, let me just say, I'm so proud of him. Thank you. I'm blessed to be his mother, to be his first teacher, to be his lifelong advocate. And when you see us, we represent, mother and son, but we actually represent our ancestors. So I just want to share a little bit about our ancestors. But before going there, in January 2016, a wise, amazing, fearless woman by the name of Iris Hope Rich, who was the executive director of the Women's League Child Development Center in Hartford, asked me a pivotal question. She asked me, would you be the director of our Big League Freedom School summer program? This was in 2016. I'm an education consultant, I'm a college instructor, and I have many projects that I work on every day. But I had worked with Mrs. Rich for many years. We believe fervently in the power of the family and community engagement. And so I was honored. I was really just so proud to be asked to do this. So I responded to her humility, excitement, and I said, I really have to think about this because I just have so much that I'm doing. And she said to me, she looked me straight in the face and said, Elsa, we need you. If you don't say yes, we won't do it. Talk about putting pressure on someone. Talk about a guilt trip. And I immediately said, how do I deny children, youth, young adults, and families this Freedom School experience in Hartford, Connecticut? But there was more to this. So as Dr. Turner said, I have roots in the Freedom Movement. And I also have a history with Children's Defense Fund. My thoughts immediately went into pre-ordered steps, destiny, and a personal continued life march. So please travel with me for a few minutes. This news clip here, you just heard about the Children's March in 1963. Well, guess what? In 1963, in Brooklyn, New York, there was a 2-year-old girl, a 4-year-old boy, with their mother and father after church on a Sunday. We were in a picket line. I said we. My brother was the 4-year-old and I was the 2-year-old. The police threatened to arrest us, to arrest a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. And when they asked my brother what he was doing, in his 4-year-old voice he said, we are marching for freedom, at 4 years old. Our father, William Jones, 3rd-generation Baptist preacher out of Kentucky, civil rights leader with Dr. King, and a friend of Marion Wright Edelman. In 1981, I, a rising senior in college, actually had an internship at the Children's Defense Fund, and I was fortunate to work with Marion Wright Edelman. So as you can hear, pre-ordered steps, right? Throughout my life, I've participated in many marches. I've marched with my brother, my mother, my sisters, my son and daughter, my nephews and nieces. Boycotts in Brooklyn when I was 10 years old, the 50th anniversary for Dr. King's I Have a Dream. My baby sister was able to speak at that march. Black Lives Matter in Hartford and New York, Women's March in DC, and we just came back from the Youth March, March for Our Lives in DC. But as you saw there, the children marched in 1963. Children as 4 years old, a child as young as 4 years old went to jail. And as you heard, they wanted to go to jail. They were marching for freedom. What you didn't see in that clip, though, is that they were greeted with water hoses, fire hoses, and they were greeted with dogs, but they still marched. Today's youth are marching. When we went to DC, they are marching against gun violence, and they're marching for mental wellness. And they cried out, vote like your lives depend on it. So I returned to Mrs. Rich's question. A pre-ordered step it was for me. Actually, before I even said yes to her, I actually heard my father give the answer. My father passed away in 2006, but he answered for me, you will do this. Because when you've been given much, much is required. So Freedom School, it's not just a summer program, and it's not just an after-school program. As Brian mentioned, there are very specific terms and concepts. Children and youth are called scholars. Scholars. Just imagine being a preschooler, and they call you a scholar. And the servant leader interns, teachers are servant leader interns. What does that mean, to be a servant and to lead? And guess what? Families, parents are involved, multi-generation. Lastly, they learn every day, I can make a difference in 6 profound ways. Let's hear about that.
It's all good. So as my mom just mentioned, the Freedom School program really focuses on this making a difference. And it truly starts with the foundation of being rooted in tradition. And the founder and president of the Children's Defense Fund, Marion Wright Edelman, she really made sure that that was embedded into this entire program. So the entire program is very immersive. I actually here have the curriculum book from a couple of years ago. So as you can see, it's fairly thick, and these are for, again, youth. And the topics are very expansive. We'll talk about, I mean, for instance, to provide an anecdote, we talked about Mexican farmers and, you know, how they would be able to provide for their family. And also Ruby Bridges, stories such as that. They're very immersive and they really tell stories that maybe have not been told. But kind of how this Freedom School program is structured during the summer is that it's a 6-week program. It's free to the families and the youth that take part in it, and that is due to the sponsors for each program. Usually each program has multiple sponsors, but all that to say it takes truly a team to make this work. And also, as my mom mentioned, the youth are called scholars. That also goes into the people working, and also specifically the people training, myself and the other people taking part in the program. They are specifically called Ella Baker trainers. Excuse me, I'm slacking over here. And Ella Baker was a social activist during this, a very strong social activist during the civil rights movement. And again, it just kind of embeds that idea that you can really make a difference, that anybody within this realm can, you know, has that power within themselves to go forth and to make a change. And lastly, one of the components that I wanted to highlight throughout the summer, or Freedom School summer, is the National Day of Social Action. A couple years ago, our focus was hunger, but what that is that every single Freedom School across the country takes part in this National Day of Social Action, where we will, again, for instance, when we did hunger, we wrote how many kids go hungry on plates, and we actually lined them up outside of the State Hall. So each program does something maybe a little bit more unique, whether they're going to the federal government or, you know, something more local. It's really just that idea to make a change and starting at any level. Actually, I'm gonna keep going.
So what you see here is Freedom School teaches children, I should say scholars, I apologize, preschoolers through 12th graders, that they can make a difference. And what you see here, though, is they're learning, I can make a difference for my family, for myself, my family, my community, my country, the world, through hope, education, and action. But what you see up here is, when Freedom Schools say I can, the reality here nationwide and in Connecticut, and this is data from 2015, is that children could not. So when you look at this, let's look at Connecticut. 4th grade public school students could not read at grade level in 2015. 85% black, 78% Hispanic, 44% white. 8th grade children could not read at grade level in 2015. This is Connecticut. 80% black, 77% Hispanic, 47% white. Education reform, that doesn't really happen. When you hear data like that, you see data like that, it's not how do we reform the schools, it's really we have to build more prisons, because that is where they are headed. So with the Freedom School, you're learning about yourself, you're learning about your culture. Children are seeing books that they are in. They see themselves in books. I don't know about you, but I grew up reading Dick and Jane. I wasn't in those books. Freedom Schools want to make a difference, and they want children to believe that they can. So as you can see, our topic is, though, 10,000 Freedom Schools. What would that look like? 10,000 Freedom Schools. You ready?
So exactly what would 10,000 Freedom Schools actually look like? As you can tell, oh, can you hear me? No, okay. So what exactly would that look like? Well, a recent CBS report actually found that in New York and Connecticut alone, it costs about $60,000 to incarcerate just one person. To give a little bit comparison, it's approximately $64,000 to run just one Freedom School. Another little stat that we have is that about 2 weeks ago, we spent, I think, just over $220 million on airstrikes against Syria. As we see here, the cost of a B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, one of those big things that clearly our Department of Defense loves spending money on, costs $737 million. As you can see with our math there, 10,000 would cost about $650 million, maybe a little bit under. And I mean, I guess we don't have to start with 10,000 right away. We can go with 1 or 2. However, it's interesting because it's, you know, maybe we have our priorities a little out of order. You know, focusing on stuff that ends futures instead of the future.
So we want you just at the end to 10,000 freedom schools. What would that look like? Scholars growing up in this world, in this country. We want children to believe, to have hope, and to be educated. We want them to act. And just in closing, I want to dedicate this to 4 people. Ruby Bridges, who in 1960 burst through the doors of segregation. My father, who believed he could be anything he wanted to be because his teachers, his family, his community, the church told him he could do that. My father, as a black man, a black preacher, preached on every continent. That is rare. Mrs. Rich, who passed away a few months ago, her center's motto is that children love to learn and children learn to love. I dedicate it to her as well. And like Rita Pearson said, every kid needs a champion. Well, what do you think? Doesn't every city, every state need freedom schools, right? Let's get 10,000 going. Thank you all.